the biological age calculator that I'm going to talk about today is Levine's phenotypic age. And what that comprises are 9 clinical variables, and that's shown here, including albumin, creatinine, serum glucose, inflammation, C-reactive protein, the percentage of lymphocytes of total white blood cells, the average red cell volume, red cell distribution width, alkaline phosphatase, white blood cell count, and age as the 10th variable. So the importance of this biological age calculator is illustrated by the finding that it's highly correlated with chronological age. So these 10 variables, its correlation with chronological age is 0.94. So a correlation of 1 or -1 is ideal, optimal, as good as it gets. So 0.94 is pretty close to 1. So it's a very strong correlation between these biomarkers with being able to predict biological age. So that data was derived from the National Health and Nutrition Study, a big data set, relatively big data set of about 10,000 people. So they replicated these findings, the phenotypic age calculator, as a measure of biological aging by looking at a separate data set, NHANES 4, and this data set included 11,000 people. And you can see visually that phenotypic age was a little bit even more strongly correlated with chronological age, with a correlation coefficient of 0.96. Now, just to put this in perspective, the epigenetic clock, Horvath's initial epigenetic clock, the correlation between that with chronological age was 0.97. So 0.94 to 0.96 is pretty close to that, if not, identical, somewhat identical. So, all right. So why is it important besides its ability to predict biological age? So the combination of those 10 variables are also associated with risk of death from all causes, also known as all-cause mortality risk. So for every 1 year increase in phenotypic age or in your biological age, all-cause mortality risk increases by 9%. You can see that here by looking at all-cause mortality for the full sample. 9% increase, significant 9% increase for each 1 year increase in biological age. Now, this finding was also true whether it was looking at young adults, middle-aged adults, or older adults. So there was a higher risk of all-cause mortality with a 1 year increase in phenotypic age. Now, in terms of disease-specific deaths, almost all of them on the list here: heart disease, cancer, chronic lower respiratory disease, diabetes, influenza or pneumonia, which may have some relevance to COVID-related conditions, but that's pure speculation, and then nephritis. So for every 1 year increase in phenotypic age, each of these outcomes, the risk for each of these, a death from each of these outcomes increased, with the one exception for cerebral vascular disease. Phenotypic age was not associated with that in NHANES 4. So optimizing biological age. How do you do it? So you just go to your doctor, get the standard chemistry panel, which is commonly performed at the yearly physical, plus the CBC, the standard blood chemistry count, which includes white blood cells, red blood cells, hemoglobin, and their differentials. And then you would have to ask for C-reactive protein. So the combination of those two, $75 to $80, at least in the US. It may be different in other countries. And just for comparison, so it's relatively cheap compared to other measures of biological age, including the epigenetic clock. So I have somebody crunch the numbers and so that I embedded that link on this link here. So if you want to calculate your phenotypic age, if you have all these blood test data, you can actually calculate your own biological age using the phenotypic age calculator. And knowing your biological age is interesting, but optimizing it is better. So how do you do that? So how does each analyte change during aging? What's its association with risk of death from all causes? And then what's my data? I'm going to show some of my data where applicable. Can diet, fitness, or optimization of body composition impact it? And for the last part of this, I just want to mention that I could have used large epidemiological studies to say, hey, in this study of 10,000 people, this has been shown to reduce albumin. And I actually started with that approach when I first started tracking, and I noticed that a lot of what's published in the epidemiological studies weren't affecting my biomarkers. And it wasn't until I started more rigorous blood testing and dietary tracking that I was able to find the diet pattern that best influences my biomarkers as opposed to what's been published in large cohorts. So let's see let's start with what's my biological age. So this is my last blood test measurement 2 months ago in March. And after putting in all of my data, I come up with a phenotypic age of 31 years, 31.61 years. I should mention, I think I have 8 or 9 measurements that include all of these blood test variables over the last 2 years. When I first started measuring, my phenotypic age was higher. It was actually 35 something. And I have articles on my website for anyone who wants to read about that. So in theory, you could say I've reduced my biological age over the past year or so. And that's mostly by changing my diet, improving my fitness and body composition, which wasn't bad to start with, but nonetheless, it is indeed possible to improve this in the short term. So the importance of this number, the 31 to 32 years old, it's important because my chronological age is actually 47. So I'm at least 15 years younger than my chronological age. So as I mentioned, one way that I'm reducing my biological age is through diet. So every day with a food scale, I weigh all my food and then I track that data using freely available online software. So I track everything, including macro and micronutrients. So protein, carbs, fat, and then vitamins, minerals, whatever the food tracking software can track. I log it into an Excel file. And then over the past year or so, I started tracking actual food intake. So how much of each food that I'm consuming, because to just break down food into macro and micronutrients, I may be missing a whole bunch of phytochemicals that may be optimizing certain biomarkers. So by looking at individual foods, it kind of accounts for that. So I've been blood testing about 4 to 6 times per year. And because I'm tracking my diet, I can then take the average dietary intake during that period that corresponds to the blood test, and that's one data point. So with enough data points, I can have enough statistical power to identify potentially meaningful correlations between stuff in my diet and my blood tests. Now, if you only measure once a year or less often, it's going to be harder to do that because you just won't know. It's too imprecise. So well, that's what I do. And then once I identify correlations between diet with my blood test results, I make dietary changes. I'm constantly changing stuff in my diet to tweak my diet to see how it affects and to try to push my biomarkers in the right direction.